Management compensation is another example of a business contract. Managers get paid by the owners. Now, what we hope to see is the managers acting in a way that best represents the ownership of the business, but that doesn't always happen. As a matter of fact, what we find is that the amount of compensation doesn't necessarily correlate with the results of the management. Here's a great example where we have Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg and Google's Larry Page and Sergey Brin making a token $1 in compensation. I mean, obviously they make their money in other ways. But the idea is that it's not the amount of money that leads the management to act in their best interest. We need to instead figure out a way to structure their compensation packages. So the conflict of interest occurs because managers want to act in a way that maximizes their compensation rather than maximizes the profitability for the shareholders. But the shareholders, the owners of the business, want the managers to act in a way that benefits them. That's why they hired the managers in the first place. So what we have is an objective for the compensation package to find incentives to let the managers act more like the owners. An easy example I have is with the wait staff of a restaurant. Waiters and waitresses often act in a way that aligns with the interest of the owners of the restaurant. They want the customers to have a great experience. They want them to get great food and have a great time because they'll leave a higher tip. So that's in the best interest of the waiter and waitress, but that's also in the best interest of the owner. If the customers have great food, great service, a great time, that leads to the restaurant doing better too. So if we can find ways to get compensation for everybody to align with the owners, then everybody wins. We have a win-win situation. Sometimes we fall into an unintended consequence. So there's an example which the truth of it is not really well documented, but it could have happened. British Empire, when India was part of that empire, the British administration did not like all the cobras, and so they wanted to find a way to get rid of them, so they put a bounty on the cobras. And any Indian person that brought in a cobra would get paid a certain amount. Well, at first it seemed to reduce the cobra population, but eventually there were more cobras. And what they found out was happening, at least allegedly was happening, was that the Indian citizens were breeding the cobras because it was a lot easier to do that in order to get the bounty than to go chase down cobras. So this idea of an unintended consequence became known as the cobra effect. And we see that occur in management compensation packages regularly. You might have seen it before when you heard about a business that was going out, a big corporation that was going out of business or having some kind of financial trouble of some sort, yet the CEO or CFO was paid, a huge bonus. We often try to tie the manager's compensation on the stock price, but the problem with that is that managers don't typically have a lot of control over the stock price in the short run, and so that's how the compensation is usually calculated. Oftentimes, things like the economy or the general business situation, maybe what's happening overseas, is going to impact the short-term prices of most stocks, and that doesn't really have anything to do with management's ability to do a good job managing. But what we did find, and what we do find, is that managers do have the ability to affect the long-run success of the stock. So we need to keep that in mind when we set up our compensation package. Instead of stock prices, we might use instead other performance measures, like some of the ratios that we learned about in previous lectures. These can be less susceptible to outside forces such as the general economy. But because management does have the ability and the authority to make judgment calls on how the financial statements are reported, that could lead management to have an incentive to make the judgment calls on the reporting of the financial statements in order to lead to them getting more of a bonus rather than having financial statements that are a better representation of the company. For these key upper level executives, such as the CEO or the CFO, a big company, a big corporation often uses a committee made up of outsiders from the company. And that committee is going to set up a compensation package, hopefully in the best interest of the company and the stockholders, but also providing enough of an incentive to get the managers to want the stock price and the profitability of the company to increase. We're going to see what happens, what kind of package is set up for compensation, and a section of the financial reports called the Compensation Discussion and Analysis, CD&A. This communicates the details to other people, shareholders, the SEC, and the general public, so that there's transparency. So the compensation will usually consist of several things. A base salary. So the base salary is usually determined by the company size, right? The industry norms in that for that type of company. The annual incentives are short-term because they're a year or less. So these short-term incentives are usually made up of determining what kind of profitability the managers have brought to the business. Long-term incentives are, well, oftentimes the most important for the organization, right? We want the stockholders to enjoy short-term gains, but in reality, it's the long-term gains that mean the most. These are usually incentives wrapped around 3 to 7 years of growth and prosperity of the company. A tool that's often used for long-term incentives is a stock option. So a stock option gives the right, not the obligation, but the right to buy the stock at a certain price. So let's say the manager has a stock option as part of his or her compensation package to buy the stock at $10. Well, the market price is currently $8. Well, the manager is not going to exercise that option, right? Because if the manager can buy the stock for $8, why would the manager buy the stock for $10? There's no incentive there. But there is an incentive for the manager to do whatever he or she can to get the stock price to go above $10, which is good for the stockholders as well as the manager. So let's say the market price is now increased on the stock to $20. Management has been doing a really good job. They've been focusing on increasing the profitability of the organization, and the market price of the stock is $20. Those managers that have options can buy the stock for $10 and then turn around and sell it and double their money. Now there's an incentive for that management to possibly exercise the options because they could make profit on that. So what we've done with this compensation incentive is we've aligned what's good for the stockholders with what's good for the managers. Now the managers may want to get their money and run. So what they often do is they create a system where the stock is restricted. In other words, the managers have to hold on to the shares for a while, and that keeps the managers from doing things in the short run to increase the price, taking their money, and then somehow getting out. Another term used for restricted stock is a golden handcuff. So that kind of helps you remember what that means because, if you're handcuffed, that means your movements are restricted. And so the golden part is because they're going to make money off of it. So it's not such a bad situation for them. They may also put a clawback provision in the compensation agreement. And what a clawback provision does is allows the owners, the company, to get their money back from bonuses to the managers if the managers got those bonuses, got the stock prices to go up because they did things that weren't ethical or they weren't legal. So they, in essence, really hurt the company, but they got a bonus because of the results that were designed in the provision. So this clawback provision says if you do it that way, you can't keep the money. Other common performance measures besides stock options would be earnings per share, return on common equity, or return on assets. So those are ratios that we talked about in previous lectures, and we could use those as an incentive to motivate the managers to get those measures up to a certain level in order for the managers to get their bonus or an increase in compensation. So those are just some other common tools that are used. So analysts on Wall Street oftentimes make predictions about the company, and executives seem to really care about meeting those Wall Street expectations. And it's curious as to why executives care about meeting those expectations. Why do we care about catering to Wall Street from the management's point of view? There's a couple of reasons that are common to management. One is to build the credibility of the company with the credit market, right? So by constantly meeting Wall Street expectations, it makes the company look good, and that way they can secure additional funds if they need to. It also tends to help the stock price. When you meet the Wall Street expectations, the stock price goes up, and managers like it when the stock price goes up. And also it helps the manager to build reputations. I mean, oftentimes managers have pretty big egos, and if they're not meeting Wall Street expectations, it can kind of make them feel bad about themselves. So they would prefer it if they did meet those expectations. The problem occurs when the focus is just on meeting Wall Street expectations. And so management might reduce discretionary spending to meet those expectations. For example, reducing their marketing, that might help them make the profitability goals in the short run. But if you reduce your marketing, you tend to get lost in the competition in future years. And research and development, it might help to cut some research and development costs. But if you're a pharmaceutical company, you need that research and development for the ongoing sustainability of your business. And what about maintenance? I mean, what if you're an airline and you're cutting down on the maintenance costs to meet profitability goals? Not very good, right? What this illustrates is a short-term versus long-term conflict of interest. Wall Street being a short-term goal, meeting the expectations of Wall Street in the near future, versus the long-term success of the organization, which, as we stated earlier, was really a better, that's really a better goal to have.